I still remember the afternoon as if it were yesterday. I was in Grandma's old study, sifting through musty files and yellowed property deeds, when my phone buzzed. It was Mom. Her tone was clipped, businesslike. "Come to my office," she said. "Now." It wasn't a request. I closed the heavy mahogany door behind me, the sunlight filtering through the stained glass window, catching dust motes in golden streaks. 11 years I had spent apprenticing under Grandma, learning every nuance of our family's real estate holdings. Downtown high-rises, suburban subdivisions, waterfront villas. 11 years of loyalty, late nights poring over blueprints, weekends. Spent negotiating with contractors just so I could step into her shoes someday. But now, in that moment, I had a sinking feeling that none of it mattered. I found Mom standing behind her sleek desk in her corner office at the family firm. It used to feel warm in here. Grandma's framed photographs, the bronze model of our flagship tower. But now it was sterile, cold. Stepfather, James, lounged in the client chair, arms crossed, a smug expression on his face. Grandma's signed will rested between them, pages splayed like a wound. "You know why you're here?" Mom began without preamble. I swallowed, my chest tightening. I had a sinking dread that this was the moment she would tell Victoria Ashford that all those years of preparation, all that blood, sweat, and tears, would be for nothing. Mom slid the will toward me as if it were a menu at a luncheon. "Grandma left you the company," she said, voice void of warmth. I blinked at her, then at the document. My name was there, plain as day, sole heir, executor of the estate, primary beneficiary of the $120 million real estate empire. I felt a surge of triumph until Mom's next words landed like a blow to the stomach. "But I've decided it's best for James to oversee operations until you're ready." Ready? Ready for what? I'd been groomed for this purpose since I was a teenager, shadowing Grandma at board meetings, mastering property valuations, navigating zoning disputes. I'd thought I'd already proven myself. I closed the file-lined door behind me and walked out into the marble lobby, my mind racing. The receptionist looked up, asked if I was okay, but I only shook my head. I needed fresh air. Outside, the city skyline stretched in front of me, indifferent as ever. I clenched my fists at my sides. How could Mom say Victoria Ashford wasn't ready? How could she hand the reins, my grandmother's legacy, to a man who'd never cracked, open a property ledger in his life? I had built my career around these assets, negotiating landmark leases, restructuring underperforming properties, forging relationships with local councils. And now, with a single sentence, Mom had stripped me of everything. That night, I barely slept. The moonlight cast long shadows across my bedroom floor as I replayed Mom's words. "James will run the company." It felt like betrayal. Grandma had made me her heir for a reason, but Mom saw James as someone steadier, more experienced, at least in her eyes. I paced my apartment, memories flooding in. Grandma teaching me to spot structural issues in old buildings, telling me, "One day, you'll know this empire like the back of your hand." I had believed her, yet here I was, bumped to the sidelines. Rage simmered in my chest, but beneath it was something colder: determination. If they thought Victoria Ashford would vanish quietly, they were in for a surprise. The next morning, just past 9, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring, bracing myself. Insomnia had turned my nerves jagged, but curiosity won out. "Hello?" I said. "Is this Daniel?" A familiar voice, gentle and measured. My grandmother's lawyer, Mr. Pierce. My heart thundered. "Yes," I managed. His tone grew grave. "I need to speak with you immediately about your grandmother's will. It seems there may be an overlooked provision." He paused, as if weighing Victoria Ashford's reaction. "Have you reviewed the final clause regarding the Oakmont redevelopment?" Oakmont, that was the single largest project in Grandma's portfolio. A multi-block urban revitalization plan worth over $50 million on its own. I felt my pulse spike. "No," I said. "I haven't." He drew in a breath. "That clause grants you sole authority to negotiate any major property dispositions on behalf of the company. Legal, financial, everything. Without your consent, any move on Oakmont would be invalid." My mind whirled. So James had no idea. He'd stamped his name on documents, signed away rights to properties he wasn't entitled to. A slow-burning realization settled in. Victoria Ashford had leverage. The pendulum could swing in my favor, if I played my cards right. I ended the call in stunned silence, the morning light seeping through the blinds. Anger still stung, but now I felt power. James was about to discover the hard way that you can't sideline the heir once the heir holds the gavel. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee growing cold, staring at nothing in particular. I wasn't sure what I would do next: confront Mom, confront James, or just watch them squirm. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to hand over my future without a fight. By 10:15, my phone buzzed again. James. I let it go to voicemail. Pride made me hesitate. A few minutes later, Mom called. I ignored that as well. I knew they were scrambling. I could almost hear the rustle of papers, the hushed whispers in marble halls as they realized their mistake. At 10:37, a text from Mr. Pierce. "I've sent you a copy of the clause. Review it ASAP." The document appeared on my phone, crisp and unyielding. Clause 14B. The designated heir shall oversee and authorize any transaction exceeding $10 million in value. Any signature without heir's approval shall be rendered null and void. My chest tightened. Old habits kicked in. I started drafting an email to Mom and James outlining Victoria Ashford's expectations. But before I could finish, another call came through. Oakmont's lead developer, Mr. Harrison. His voice was calm but urgent. "I heard there's been some disturbance with the project. I want to see you at our office this afternoon. We can't move forward until this is resolved," I exhaled, heart pounding. The Oakmont deal was scheduled for a final board meeting the next day, Friday at 2 p.m. If James signed off without me, developers, investors, and city officials would walk. I slid on shoes and grabbed my bag. I had to act fast. I arrived at the Oakmont office just after noon. The building was a restored warehouse, exposed brick, industrial windows, an homage to Grandma's aesthetic. I spotted Harrison pacing near a conference table strewn with blueprints. He looked up, relief washing over his face. "Thank God you're here," he said, rushing over. "James just tried to finalize the financing package without you. He didn't even read the clause?" I nodded. "He's about to find out that without Victoria Ashford's signature, no deal moves forward." Harrison leaned in, scanned the text, and nodded. "This is solid. I'll call them now." He stepped into a side room, leaving me alone with the half-built models of Oakmont towers. I ran my fingers over the miniature bricks, remembering Grandma's voice. Every brick tells a story. That story now belonged to Victoria Ashford. By 12:45, Harrison emerged. "They're on board, but they want you for Friday's meeting. They'll cancel if you don't show." He paused. "And James is furious." I nodded, already mentally preparing my return. It wasn't enough to foil James. I needed to reassert Victoria Ashford's place in the company. I sent a brief message to Mom. "I'll be in the office at 1:30 to discuss company leadership and Oakmont." Then I left, feeling the weight in my chest transform, grief and anger giving way to resolve. I arrived at the family firm's headquarters at 1:30 sharp, stepping through the main lobby like I owned the place. Because I did. The receptionist looked up, eyes widening. Rumors had traveled fast. Within moments, Mom appeared, her heels clicking on marble. She stopped when she saw me, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "You're back early," she managed. I didn't flinch. "I need to see James," I said. She nodded, shoulders tensing. "He's in the boardroom." James stood at the head of a long oak table, tapping his pen against a stack of papers. Investors in suits hovered at the far end, some whispering, others checking their watches. The moment he saw me, his face drained of color. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice tight. I walked down the length of the table, meeting investor glances, letting them know I was the real authority. "I'm here," I replied simply. "Victoria Ashford, here to finalize Oakmont." He scoffed. "You're what? The heir on paper only." I slid the clause across the table. "Real authority. Read it." He stared at the clause, hands trembling. The investors leaned in. The atmosphere thickened. His bravado vanished like smoke. He looked to Mom, pleading with his eyes. She averted her gaze. I turned to the lead investor, Mr. Lin, a composed man with silver hair. "Mr. Lin," I said, "my grandmother trusted me with this project. I intend to honor her vision. If everything looks in order, let's proceed." Mr. Lin nodded curtly. "We have questions about zoning changes." I unfolded the blueprint, explaining each amendment, how the mixed-use spaces would revitalize the neighborhood, how the green corridors would honor Grandma's commitment to community. Every sentence was measured, confident. By 2:30, we had agreement. Handshakes all around. I felt a surge of vindication as investors filed out with hopeful expressions. James slumped into a chair, red-faced, his role reduced to spectator. After the meeting, I followed Mom down the hall to her office. She closed the door behind us, stepping aside as I entered. She perched at the edge of her leather chair, eyes lowered. I sat across from her, heart still hammering. "Mom," I began, voice steady, "why did you think James was more capable?" She looked up, exhaustion in her gaze. "He's older. He has experience in finance, connections. I thought he could protect you." I frowned. "He's already jeopardized everything." She sighed. "I know. I was wrong." I studied her face, years of stoicism cracking. "I need to know you trust Victoria Ashford, and that James steps aside." She nodded, tears glinting. "He will, I promise." That evening, I returned to my apartment feeling both triumphant and hollow. The Oakmont deal was safe, but deeper battles lay ahead. James hadn't disappeared. I knew him too well. He would retaliate. I sat on my balcony, city lights twinkling, and whispered into the night, "Bring it on." Sure enough, signs of sabotage began almost immediately. First, expense reimbursements for Oakmont travel, hotel bills, consultant fees weren't processed. I followed up with accounting. They said the files were missing signatures. Then a confidential proposal meant for a new Southside development appeared in my inbox with errors I hadn't made, wrong square footage, incorrect budget allocations. Panic settled in my chest. Whoever was behind this knew how to target Victoria Ashford's responsibilities. I filed each incident in a private notebook, logging dates, times, and anomalies. Late one evening, I discovered an email draft, purportedly from me, sent to a key lender, referencing a non-existent environmental study. I contacted the lender directly. Thankfully, they recognized my email address wasn't spoofed. But seeds of doubt had been sown. I knew instinctively who was orchestrating this: James. His smug confidence masked his desperation. He was trying to erode Victoria Ashford's credibility piece by piece, hoping I'd resign in frustration. But I refused. I remembered Grandma's words. "Integrity is your shield when others swing swords." I began to tighten my defenses, changing passwords, copying every document to personal storage, enlisting Mr. Pierce to oversee a discreet forensic review of communication logs. 2 days later, I was summoned to a meeting with the company's audit committee, an austere room lined with file-filled cabinets and a long conference table illuminated by harsh fluorescent lights. The lead auditor, Ms. Reynolds, motioned for me to sit. Beside her were two others, laptops open, screens flickering with data. "We've discovered irregularities in company communications and financial records under your department's purview," Ms. Reynolds began. My stomach clenched. "I'm aware," I replied quietly. "I've reported them as they occurred." She looked at me, expression softening. "We traced multiple login attempts tied to your assistant's credentials being copied. Files associated with Oakmont and other portfolio assets were altered. Expense approvals, project proposals, internal memos. Some documents were deleted altogether. Emails were forged and sent to external partners, intentionally misrepresenting your directives." A hush fell. I sat silent, absorbing each word. Ms. Reynolds continued, "We're narrowing down the list of people with access. Patterns point to James's executive assistant account." My jaw clenched. I flinched at the confirmation. The room felt colder. Mr. Pierce spoke next, voice low but firm. "James, the evidence is clear. You had access to every one of these systems, and the pattern aligns with your credentials." James's gaze flicked to me, rage mixed with desperation. I was trying to protect the company. You were jeopardizing everything by staying on the Oakmont timeline." His voice cracked. Mom shook her head, tears in her eyes. The CFO cleared his throat. "This is not about protection. It's about sabotage, undermining the heir the late matriarch designated." The board exchanged nods. Mr. Pierce added, "We recommend immediate suspension pending termination for breach of ethical conduct and gross misconduct." James slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. I sat silent, heart racing, as the final blow landed. James rose abruptly, heading for the door. His footsteps echoed down the hallway like the closing of a chapter. I remained seated until his silhouette disappeared. The room was quiet. Mr. Pierce turned to me, offering a small, sympathetic smile. "Victoria Ashford, you did the right thing," he said. My lips curved into a measured nod. Relief washed over me, not triumphant, but serene, like flames finally doused, leaving charred remains to be cleared. That afternoon, I was invited back to Mom's office. She closed the door behind me, standing awkwardly by the window. I sank into the chair across from her, feeling the weight of every moment over, the past days. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice thick. "I thought I was doing what was best." I placed my hand on hers. "I know you did, but it almost cost Grandma's legacy, and it certainly cost our family." She nodded, tears spilling. "What now?" I took a breath. "We rebuild. We make sure no one else is bullied or sidelined here." She gave a faint smile. "I agree." A week later, news of Oakmont's successful financing and redevelopment plan hit industry journals. Ashford Enterprises reclaims control of Oakmont, project under new leadership. They wrote about a visionary heir stepping up, but they glossed over the internal drama. I didn't mind. I knew the truth. I spent the next days finalizing my transition into CEO. Board members signed off on a resolution reinstating Victoria Ashford's operational authority across all properties. Mom and I held discussions about corporate governance changes, anonymous reporting channels, stricter segregation of duties, firewalls around executive accounts, so no one else could pull the strings behind the scenes. At month's end, I sat in what used to be Grandma's office, now refurbished with modern touches, sleek desk, minimalist shelves, a framed photo of Grandma in her prime. I ran my fingers along the desk's polished surface. 11 years had led Victoria Ashford here. First as apprentice, then sidelined, then vindicated, now at the helm. I reflected on the lessons learned. Competence without assertiveness tends to be ignored. silence in the face of injustice invites more injustice, and ultimately, respect must be earned, not assumed. Then I thought of James, punished, ostracized, forced to retreat. I wondered if he'd learned anything, or if he'd simply be headed to another town, another firm, carrying scars and bruised pride. Part of me felt pity, but I reminded myself, I had no obligation to salvage his ego. My focus was on moving forward, not looking back. That evening, I walked the halls, stopping by the conference room where Oakmont's final approvals had been signed. Remnants of celebration, blueprints rolled up, champagne glasses on a side table, lay abandoned as though frozen in time. I placed a hand on the glass wall, remembering the day Victoria Ashford had walked in with Mom, confronting James and reclaiming her birthright. I had been terrified, but I had held my ground. That moment, when I refused to beg, when I demanded respect, had changed everything. It was in that refusal that I truly inherited Grandma's legacy. Back in my office, I drafted an internal memo. Effective immediately, all major project negotiations will require dual authorization, heir and COO. Any attempt to bypass this process will result in immediate suspension and review. Our company's integrity is non-negotiable. I paused before hitting send, thinking of the junior analyst who had whispered her support in the hallway, of the leasing agent whose congratulations had felt genuine, of the construction foreman who'd stuck around despite the uncertainty. Then I hit send and exhaled, feeling the weight lift. Weeks later, the Oakmont towers broke ground. I stood among the crowd at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. City officials, investors, neighbors, and company employees, all cheering as the first bulldozer roared. Mom stood beside me, tears in her eyes. I slipped my hand into hers. "We did it," she whispered. I smiled, looking up at the horizon where skyscrapers met dusk. "No," I said quietly. "Grandma did it." Later, alone in the office, I reviewed my calendar. Site visits, board meetings, charity fundraisers for affordable housing. The company would grow, evolve, but it would never be the same unchecked dynasty it once was. I thought of every late night, every negotiation saved, every obstacle overcome. I realized that building an empire wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It was about forging a culture of accountability, respect, and vision. And as I placed my grandmother's portrait on the shelf, I whispered, "I promise to honor your legacy every single day." And I knew this was only the beginning.